Hello, my name is Barbara Lewis, and I am Vice President of the Dunbar Coalition. And on behalf of the Dunbar Coalition and our extensive Dunbar family, I want to welcome you to the Dunbar Pavilion, which is an African American Arts and Cultural Center. This facility has been on this site since 1918. For those of you who are not familiar with Dunbar, here's a little history. Paul Laurence Dunbar Junior High, named for the world-renowned African American poet and author, was the segregated school for African American students in Tucson. It was the only school that African American students could attend, and the only school African American teachers could teach. And that's from 1918 to 1951. During this time, while Dunbar produced a number of outstanding achievers in all disciplines and adult leadership for all manner of human endeavor, this was not due in any part to the educational system, but to a supportive African American community and caring teachers who taught beyond the used outdated books given them and a facility lacking in many of the basics common in other schools. In 1951, it was mandated that Tucson schools would be desegregated, and Dunbar students were dispersed throughout the TUSD school system. The school's name was changed to John Spring, one of the first Caucasian teachers in Arizona when it was a territory. This was said to be done to erase all traces of segregation. However, the school was never thought to be free from segregation because of Tucson's housing patterns, and in 1978 was intended closed for good. In 1994, the Dunbar Coalition, made up of the Dunbar Alumni, the Tucson Urban League, the Dunbar Spring Neighborhood Association, and the Juneteenth Committee, was formed and purchased the dilapidated building for $25 with the intent to renovate and become an African American Arts and Culture Center. And here we stand today. We hope you find your visit here to be a very pleasant one, in a place that has traveled a road from exclusion to one that celebrates African American resiliency in Tucson, and a place that welcomes all in the spirit of positivity. We want to ask you to please visit the Dunbar website, that's Dunbar Pavilion website, to learn more, and we thank you very much for coming.
Good morning. Buenos dias. My name is Nancy Hand, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. Soy Nancy Hand, soy presidenta de la Liga de Mujeres Votantes de Tucson y sus alrededores. Thank you for joining us today for our first in-person event in more than 2 years. Gracias. Gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy en nuestra primera función presencial en más de 2 años. We are thrilled to be here in person with you on this beautiful Tucson day. Estamos muy emocionadas y emocionados por estar aquí con ustedes en persona en este lindo día tucsonense. We respectfully acknowledge that the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Tono Atam and the Pascua Yaqui people. We also humbly acknowledge that for most of its history, our organization has not been welcoming to women of color. To quote our CEO of the League of Women Voters of the U.S., Virginia K. Solomon, even during the civil rights movement, the League was not as present as we should have been. While activists risked life and limb to register black voters in the South, the League's work and our leaders were late in joining to help protect all voters at the polls. It wasn't until 1966 that we reached our first position to combat discrimination. Still, our focus on social policy was from afar, not on the front lines, and African Americans were shut out of the vision of the League. Today, we invite all people, regardless of gender, gender identity, ability, ethnicity, or race, to join us as we commit to righting the wrongs of our past and building a stronger, more inclusive democracy. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. We neither support nor oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government. We do, however, advocate for public policy, such as voting rights, non-discrimination, civil rights, and criminal justice reform. We have been empowering voters and defending democracy in Greater Tucson for 81 years. This year, especially, we have our work cut out for us. The 2022 elections will see a major change in the way we vote in Pima County. On February 15th, the Pima County Board of Supervisors voted to adopt a new voting system, which the League supports. New laws will affect the permanent early voting list and other aspects of voting in our state. We are gearing up for a major campaign to inform voters of these changes and to make sure that all eligible voters have the information they need to make their voices heard in the midterms this fall. And now I would like to introduce our star MC, Lupita Murillo. We all know Lupita from her excellent work as an investigative reporter on KVOA News 4. But you might not know that Lupita was a pioneer in her field. She was the first Hispanic female in broadcasting in South Texas. And it was about time, since the region is 85% Latino. She has been recognized nationally by the American Women in Radio and Television. She has appeared nationally on crime shows from Dateline to Snapped. She's an Emmy nominee and has won several prestigious Edward R. Murrow Awards and Associated Press Awards. She is a recipient of the University of Arizona's Hispanic Alumni Award and the Esperanza Award given to her by homicide survivors. But we all know and appreciate Lupita as the people's newswoman, always digging under the headlines for the information we need and want as a community, and always giving her time to community organizations across Tucson and Arizona. And today, she generously lends her voice to the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson as our MC for this important celebration of the arts with a focus on equity in education. Thank you, Lupita. Gracias.
Oh my, well thank you so much. I have to tell you, I've got the jitters because this is the first in-person event that I've moderated and emceed in 2 years. So, but no worries, you know what? I brought my mama with me, so I'm good. I'd like to introduce my mom. Baby, everyone hit Mom. And y'all know that if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here. Also, this is a little homecoming. Great to see Nancy and Chris. They used to all work out together with my mom, very bright and early. Those were her gym buddies. So this is fun. This is fun. Anyway, okay, all right. I'm going to begin with this quote. You are the artist of your own life. Don't hand the paintbrush to anyone else. Yes. And I don't know who the author is, but I think that is so appropriate, especially for today. This morning we have Henry Elementary School Opera, created by the students, and the name is Corona Blues. And we're also going to see 2 examples of opening minds through the arts, OMA, an arts integration curriculum at Tucson Unified School. This amazing program brings out educators' passion for teaching and fully engages the students. Here's an example.
And let's do our warm up. Get your 8 spider legs out and touch your toes. Ready, sing.
Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. And the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again.
Good job.
Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posy.
Hello, I am the best pet. My name is Pete. I am a cat. I like to jump in puddles and chase mice. I will be your best friend forever. Let's go play. Meow.
This is what I was working on. The kids have been working on a problem to solve, which is can engineers create an art machine that can either draw or scribble. So it was really a design problem that they had to be able to solve.
And because that Oma engineer, because we are engineers of our robots, Oma bots.
Insert the marshmallow. Get your clue.
Leapt without looking and tumbled into the sun. The water was freezing. She spent a month sneezing, but said she would do it again. Here's to the ones who dream, foolish as they may seem. With me and you'll see in a world of pure imagination. Take a look and you'll see into your imagination. We'll begin with a spin, traveling in the world of my creation. What we'll see will defy explanation.
Well, this is an example of the OMA program in the Tucson Unified School District, and you can tell that the students are really enjoying themselves. This is part of what we're here to do this morning, to learn more about these programs and why it's important that we help out in any way we can. Obviously, financially is probably the best. There's also another piece here that I hope we have it queued up here. This is the Year of the Tiger, and according to the Chinese calendar, the Tucson Chinese Cultural Center performs the Lion Dance. The Lion Dance chases away evil spirits and welcomes the prosperous times. The lion brings joy and good fortune. education is extremely important because it will help provide bright futures for all our children. We just enjoyed some wonderful examples of creative learning. The children, as you saw, appeared to enjoy their participation. These experiences matter, but continued funding for innovative programs is critical. Funding equity for K-12 education must not be overlooked. I'm sure our keynote speaker will emphasize this. And let me tell you a little bit about David Lujan. We met in the hallway, so we're good friends. He is the president and CEO of the Arizona Children's Action Alliance. He previously served as the founding director of the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, an affiliate of the Children's Action Alliance. David is a former member of the state Senate and the House of Representatives and has worked in public policy here in Arizona for 20 years. He earned his law degree from the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at ASU. David, we're not going to hold that against you because this is Wildcat country. How about them Wildcats? The women, the Lady Cats, and the men's basketball team. Ladies play tonight. Almost a sold-out crowd, 10,000 people. Anyway, I'm sorry. Okay. So, at this time, I want to remind y'all that you have these little cards. So, keep them handy because you could write questions to David, and then afterwards, David will hopefully answer some of your questions towards the end of his speech. And we'll have members of the league going around picking these up, so be sure to fill these out. David, and hopefully you'll be able to answer some of these questions at the end of your speech. Okay, good. And I was also told, go ahead, here. I was also told by one of the league members when she saw him that he is a treasure.
Thank you, Lupita, and thank you. It's great to be here in person. It's good to see all of you. And so I have to start by saying that when we're talking about education funding in Arizona, education policy, to be able to cover everything that's happening right now in Arizona at the state capitol, there's no way I could possibly do that in the 20 minutes that I have. So I'm going to kind of cover some of the highlights, but then hopefully if you do have questions, I can answer as many of those questions as you have. So before I talk about funding for education, I think it's really important also to give some context about how our students are doing in Arizona, how schools are performing academically. So I wanted to start just first of all, just give you a couple of slides that will just give you sort of a snapshot of how students are doing. And before I do that, I have to give you some context, and that is, and this is occurring across the country, and that is because of the pandemic, because students are at home, and you saw from the slides that we shot before, you can all just imagine the incredible challenges that schools and teachers are facing in educating students today. I have a friend who's a kindergarten teacher, and I was talking to her, and I was like, I cannot even imagine how difficult and challenging it must be to be teaching a class of 25 kindergartners who are all on Zoom, and she's trying to keep them controlled. But that's what schools have been dealing with for the last year. These slides, the first two slides that I'm going to show you are from Education Forward Arizona. They used to be known as Expect More Arizona. This is an education advocacy group in Arizona that really tracks student progress. And so these are scores from the Arizona Merit Test. This is Arizona's standardized test that all public school students in Arizona take once a year, all grade levels and different subjects. This particular slide is the results for third grade reading, which you probably know is a very critical indicator of student success. If students are not reading proficiently by the end of third grade, then research shows us that they tend to struggle throughout the rest of their educational cycle. And this, you can see that before the pandemic, we were on an upward trend. We still weren't doing well, because even the top dot is 46% of third graders in 2019 were proficient in reading at the end of third grade. This is 2021. you can see the huge drop off. It goes down from 46% to 36%. We had a 10% drop in third grade reading proficiency in just a year, and that's a big impact. But even before the pandemic, we were still well below 50%. This is 8th grade math. Again, you can see we were starting to trend up before the pandemic. We were at 41% of 8th graders were proficient in math at the end of 8th grade, and that number dropped to 27% in 2021. And this is our own, as I said, Arizona merit test. When you look at other tests that compare us to other states, our students in almost all categories are below the national average in all educational categories. We were, as I said, making progress, but then with the pandemic, it's really started to drop. This is sort of the result of what happens, and that is post-secondary attainment. How well are we doing in Arizona of graduating students with a bachelor's degree? In Arizona, this is 2018. Again, there's data that's recently available, but it's skewed. But just to give you a comparison to how we fare against the rest of the country, 29% of Arizonans ages 25 to 34 have earned a bachelor's degree, compared to the U.S. average, which also is not that great, of 35%. So we are well below the national average in post-secondary attainment, and that's a result of how students are performing from kindergarten through 8th grade, or through 12th grade. So I show you this because the question when I talk about funding is always, does funding matter when it comes to educational performance? And it's not the only thing, for sure, but it is a big deal. If schools do not have the resources, that ties their hands and to be able to help students close these achievement gaps. Before I was doing what I'm doing now, I was a school principal for Asu Preparatory Academy. It's a charter school in downtown Phoenix we helped to start with 90% of our students were students of color, 75% of our students were low-income students. Many of those students came into the school behind, and the school actually has a very good reputation of being able to close that gap. But how do they do it? It's resources. A major reason why students often are behind is when they start, if they haven't been to kindergarten and they start in first grade, the difference between first graders who have had kindergarten versus not is significant. Plus just the ability of parents to be able to spend time with their kids in the years leading up to first grade, being able to read to them, and those are disparities that some students have that ability to have that and other students don't. And so when you have those gaps, schools can close them if they have enough resources. So at Asu Preparatory Academy, for example, some of the things we did is we had Saturday school. We would have extra programs on Saturday or after school or before school. But those take resources because you have to be able to pay staff, and so that's money. We had really great tutoring programs. Those take resources. So money does make a difference because there are programs and things that you can do to help close that gap. But if you don't have the money and the funding to be able to do it, then it's not going to be able to happen. Plus, we shouldn't want to just have average schools. This is about the arts today. This is the big theme. Schools in many cases today don't have arts and sports and music like we had when many of us were in school. And so that's what we should be striving for, right? We should be striving for education system like we used to have, where you had all of these robust programs and not just the bare minimums. And so that's why I wanted to show you this, because funding does matter in terms of the quality of education that our students receive, and that translates, I think, to student success. Also, teachers matter. Research shows that having a good teacher in the classroom is going to really drive student success. Unfortunately, in Arizona, right now, we have one of the worst teacher shortage crises in the country. And this is one of the main reasons. We are doing a terrible job of paying our teachers. Arizona is last in the country in paying, this is for elementary school teachers, and for high school teachers, not much better. We're 47th in the country in terms of teacher salaries. So our teacher shortage crisis, which was already bad before the pandemic, has gotten much worse. I mean, you can imagine you're among the worst paid in the country, plus now you've got a pandemic and you're having to teach students by Zoom, and you're having to, you've got all of these political issues in terms of masks or no masks, and critical race theory and all these things. And so teachers understandably are fleeing the profession, and that is going to have a significant impact in how we educate students in Arizona. So how are we doing in terms of funding education? Not very good, actually quite horrible. We are, right now, Arizona is 49th in the country in per pupil funding. That's according to the US Census Bureau. For the last 10 years, Arizona has gone back and forth between either 48th, 49th, or 50th for the last 10 years, and we have been in the bottom 10 in the country for the last 20 years. So when you look at that slide about post-secondary attainment and people being able to go to college, that's one of the big reasons. If we are not valuing education, if we're not funding education, then it's going to translate into poor performance in our schools. And this chart, what it shows, the blue line is the national average in funding education in states. And the bottom line is Arizona. And you can see we've been getting further and further away from the national average in Arizona. So why is it so difficult to fund public education in Arizona? It gets to the revenue. How do we pay for education in Arizona? We pay for it through our tax dollars. And in Arizona, our state legislature has cut taxes every year but two since 1990. More than $6 billion in revenue has been reduced from our general fund over the last 3 decades because of all of these tax cuts. No state in the country has cut taxes more regularly, more consistently than Arizona. And so when you're cutting taxes like that, you're reducing revenue. So this is a slide I think I've showed you before. It's a little bit jumbled, but this shows the top line is state revenues in Arizona, and the bottom line is state spending, investments, how what we spend on education and other things. It's going back all the way to 1970. That's where it starts on the far left. The solid line in the middle is 1990. That's the year we started to really cut taxes year after year. And so you can see that from 1970 to 1990, we were kind of trending up in terms of revenue in the state and also in what we were spending. But ever since 1990, ever since the legislature has been cutting taxes every year, you can see state spending, investments, has been going steadily down. And this isn't just education, this is for higher education also, and child care and funding for health care. Everything that we fund in Arizona has been steadily being defunded for the last 3 decades. And you can directly attribute that to policies at the legislature of cutting taxes every single year. And so what happens also is when you're cutting taxes like that, is that when you have economic downturns, we as a state are not able to recover from those downturns as well as other states that have better revenues. So when the Great Recession hit in 2008, no state in the country cut more from public education between 2008 and 2014 than Arizona. We led the nation in cuts to public education from 2008 to 2014. And here's the thing. During those years when we were still having the biggest cuts to education funding in the country, our legislature in 2012 passed the largest corporate tax cuts in state history at the same time that we were slashing funding for schools. And so that's what's happening here. And so it's who we elect and the policies that they pursue at the state capitol absolutely matter. So I also wanted to touch, and I know, like I said, it's going to go quickly. I wanted to touch on an issue that we've heard a lot about this year, and that is another issue that's impacting how we fund schools in Arizona. It hasn't really been much of an issue until this year, but oh boy, is this going to be an issue going forward if we don't address this in a permanent way. And that is the constitutional spending limit that we have in our state constitution. In 1980, the voters of Arizona passed a spending limit in our state constitution, which basically said that whatever we were spending to educate students in 1980, that is the limit that we can spend each year. And so the reason this passed was at a different time, it was to try and limit property taxes. And Arizona was a much more conservative state. Voters were more conservative than Arizona. And so voters passed this. And it hasn't been much of an issue until this year because frankly, every time we've gotten close to the spending limit, we've spent education funding so much that it's never an issue. But because of the Red for Ed movement and all the other things that we've seen, we've been getting a little bit more funding. We're still, as you see, Arizona does not have a spending problem when it comes to education, but nevertheless, we are hitting our spending limit. This year, we went over it by $1.2 billion. So even though we are almost at the bottom in funding for public education compared to the rest of the nation, our own state spending limit, we're $1.2 billion over this year. And the reason is, this spending limit is based on what it costs to educate students in 1980. Think about how many different changes we've had in our schools since 1980. We didn't have computers, we didn't have the internet. So those are costs that schools have now that they didn't have then. Fortunately, back in 1980, we didn't have school shootings like we have today. And so that's an additional cost that schools have because if your schools, you want to keep your students safe, so you have to have more staff, and that's more costs and more spending. And so it's not like we're spending too much. That's not why we're going over the spending limit. It's because it's antiquated. It's based on 1980 levels. And so what happens is when we go over the spending limit, like we did this year by $1 billion, there's only one thing that can happen, is that the legislature has to vote by 2/3 majority in both chambers to allow school districts to go over the spending limit for that particular year. So they can do that on a year-by-year basis, and that happened this year. We went over, and fortunately, the legislature, due to a lot of public pressure, voted to override the spending limit for this year. But that's not the end of the problem, because we are going to have the exact same issue next year, and the year after, and the year after, and the year after. And if we are already at the spending limit, and we are 49th in the country in funding for public education, that spending limit is going to permanently keep us at the bottom. So we have in our own state constitution a spending limit that is going to permanently keep us in the bottom of funding. So there needs to be a more long-term solution to deal with the spending limit issue. We need to, and the only way we can fix this is to go to the voters, because it's in the Constitution. So only the legislature can't change it permanently. So something needs to be referred to the voters to either permanently repeal this outdated spending limit that's in our Constitution, or at the very least modernize it so that it's based on 2022 levels and not 1980 levels. And so this is a big issue. Even though the legislature has addressed it for this year, our organization, a lot of education advocacy organizations, are really working hard at the Capitol to try and get legislators to refer something to the ballot this November so that we can fix this permanently. Because another issue that's near and dear to my heart, Proposition 208, which is, I know a lot of you worked on it, where we went out in 2020 and passed a measure to raise taxes on the wealthy in order to fund public education. Last week, the courts struck down Prop 208 because of this issue. They said that you can't raise taxes on people if schools are not going to be able to spend that money because of the spending limit. Now, there's a whole lot of politics that went into that decision, because we actually, if you read the Prop 208, it actually contained language to specifically exempt those dollars from the school spending limit. But we have a very conservative Supreme Court that tried to twist itself in pretzels to try and strike that law down. But that's why Prop 208 is being struck down, is because of this issue. And so while we want to get the legislature to put more money into education, or while we might want to go out and do another ballot measure to put more money into education, we can't until we first fix this issue, because that is what's keeping us from getting above the spending limit. I'm going to skip this one just because of the time. Here's another issue, though, in terms of tax cuts. So there is hope to address our school funding issue, or at least there should be, and that is last year and this year, because of all the federal dollars that have come into our state, Arizona actually has had two of the largest budget revenue surpluses the last 2 years. Last year, we had a $2 billion revenue surplus that could have been put into education, could have been put into healthcare or housing. It was the largest revenue surplus we've ever had in state history. Talk about an opportunity to get us out of the hole, because those opportunities do not come along very often. And when you have revenue like that, it's important because it takes a 2/3 majority of the legislature to raise taxes. It only takes a simple majority to cut taxes. It takes a 2/3 to raise. So when you've got a revenue surplus, you got to use that. But the legislature didn't last year. Instead, they gave away that $2 billion revenue surplus in the largest tax cuts in state history. 90% of those tax cuts go to the wealthiest 10% of Arizonans. Here you can see the breakdown. So it's hard to read, but if you are in the top 1% of income in Arizona, meaning you're making over $500,000 a year, you're going to get an annual tax cut of on average, $19,928. If you're a household making $64,000 a year, you're going to get an average tax cut of $47. And this is $2 billion in tax cuts. So not fair, right? Not what we want to be doing when we have a revenue surplus. So last summer, our organization and a number of others went out and said, we need to stop this. So we did a referendum. And thousands of Arizonans went out and collected signatures to stop these tax cuts from going into effect. And we got the signatures, and they're supposed to be on the ballot this November so that voters can vote. Do you want these tax cuts for the rich to go into effect? Or would you rather stop them and then have $2 billion that we could otherwise invest in education and all these other priorities that we have? As of right now, this is on the ballot. But on Monday, the governor is expected to call a special session for the legislature to do what's called a repeal and replace. They are going to try to repeal the tax cuts that they passed last year, and then they will immediately pass the same tax cuts, just slightly different. Why would they do that? That is just to stop the voters from having a say on the tax cuts. We would have to go out and do the referendum all over again. They are trying to block the will of the voters from having a say in these tax cuts that are wildly unpopular with voters. And so that special session, we got word yesterday, the governor will likely call that special session on Monday morning. It'll start on Monday at 1:30. And the committee will start to move these bills on Tuesday. It's going to go fast, and it'll be over by the end of next week. So that's an issue you should pay attention to, because the first blow was losing Prop 208. We have another chance to get funding for education, and now they're going to try and take that away too. So something to keep on in mind. One more thing, we still have another revenue surplus this year. We still have $700 million in revenue surplus for this year. guess what they're trying to do with that $700 million? More tax cuts. They want to do even more tax cuts this year, corporate tax cuts, to give away a good portion of those dollars. And so when we talk about inequities in education, these funding disparities hit schools that primarily serve students of color and low-income students the hardest, because what's happening is wealthier districts have the ability to go out and do bonds and overrides, and we often hear that, and all districts can do bonds and overrides, but bonds and overrides are based on the property values of the property within your district. And so high wealth districts are able to tax their property owners and raise money to overcome some of these deficiencies. But for example, Sunnyside, amphitheater districts, they really struggle to raise money to be able to make those inequities. So what happens is the students in those districts, Sunnyside, amphitheater, they don't have nearly the kinds of resources that, say, students in the Vail district do. And so that's the situation that we have in Arizona. That's why this election and election years like this are so important. It's really important to pay attention to where lawmakers, candidates stand on these issues, because we have the money. We had the money last year, we have the money this year, but if we have legislators, and part of the issue is people, all of us, often don't connect the dots. They don't see that when you're cutting taxes, how that's impacting the ability to fund our schools. But that's what we need to be able to do, is connect the dots between, if a legislator says, oh, I'm pro-public education, I support schools, you should say, yeah, but where do you stand on tax policy? And they say, well, we want to cut taxes. We need to put money back in the pockets of Arizonans. And what we see from our polls is that Arizonans don't want to see more tax cuts. They want to see investments in education. And guess what? That's what businesses that are looking to move to Arizona want to see too. We already have some of the lowest taxes in the country. And so businesses are not looking for more tax cuts when they move to Arizona. What they're saying is, we want to move to your state, but we want to see that you've got a good education system for our employees that we're going to move there. We want to see that you have a good education system that's creating the workforce that's going to help our businesses to succeed. And so I don't know where we ever got into this mode at the legislature. I know where it is. It's just about creating a very small government as possible. But that's the only strategy we see at the state capitol, is let's cut taxes to grow our economy. And what we're saying is a better way to grow our economy, a better way for Arizona to thrive, is to invest in education, to invest in healthcare, to invest in affordable childcare and affordable housing. Those are the things that Arizonans are looking for to create a better life for themselves and to be able to move up the economic ladder. So I think I went way over my time, so I'm happy to, no, Mike, good. Good, well, I'll stop here and answer any questions.
So, this is a good one. So what should we do? Call a representative or a legislator, or the legislatures?
Yes, and by the way, the rumor is, I think it's more than a rumor, that the governor's going to call a special session. I was talking with one of the chiefs of staff in the Senate, and they actually got a call from the governor's office saying that they were planning to call this special session for Monday. There's still a chance it might not happen because we still don't think they have the votes to do it, but and so the majority party, as you know, has only a one-person majority in each chamber. It's 31-29 in the House and 16-14 in the Senate. The Democrats are solid against doing this repeal and replace. So if they lose just one vote on the majority side, it stops their ability to do this. So it is more important than ever for people to be reaching out to their legislators and letting them know that you're paying attention and you don't want them to do this. Particularly in an election year where we've had redistricting, there's a number of legislators now that are in more competitive districts. And so, if they know that you're watching and you don't want this, then I think that could have an impact. We only need to get one person on the majority side to say they're not going to do this, and that'll stop it. But yeah, reaching out to legislators is really important.
Your first few slides, achievement levels for 3rd graders, 8th graders, does this include charter and private schools?
It includes charter schools. It does not include private schools. So students in traditional public schools and charter schools are required to take the Arizona Merit Standardized Test. Private school students are not. And so these are charters and traditional public schools.
For K through 12 in Arizona, what percentage of students are in public schools?
I believe the last number I heard was 72%. And this is important because another thing that you're seeing this year in particular at the legislature, well, we've seen it for a few years, is really trying to give advantages to private schools and charter schools and taking away funding from or making it more difficult to get funding for traditional public schools. And so, and the policymakers who are doing this, the lawmakers will say, well, we're wanting to give choice. We want to, true choice. Well, the overwhelming top choice, number one choice of parents in Arizona are traditional public schools. And so you see the poor job that we're doing of funding traditional public schools. So how are you giving choice to parents if you're constantly defunding the number one choice of parents in Arizona? And that, they're talking a lot, you hear a lot of rhetoric at the state capitol that, oh, parents are fleeing public schools, that they don't, and the statistics, the data do not bear that out. Public schools enrollment is up this year. Charter school enrollment is actually down. And so, parents in Arizona still overwhelmingly favor traditional public schools. We're just not doing a very good job of funding that choice at the state legislature.
Here's a question, perfect timing. Talk about charter schools. Do legislatures own many of them? Where is the separation between church and state regarding church schools?
So with charter schools that do receive tax dollars, well, you could argue now that private schools are receiving tax dollars through vouchers as well, but charter schools directly receive funding from the state through the formula. They are not allowed to provide any sort of religious education in charter schools. The question, I think, was, do legislators own charter schools? There are, I think, a couple. I know Eddie Farnsworth, who's no longer, he retired last year. He owned several. I think there might be one or two other legislators that do own charter schools. And there are good charter schools and there are bad charter schools. There are some that are run by, like the one I ran was run by Arizona State University. Some are actually run by traditional public schools. Some have charter schools that they operate. But then you have some that are run by for-profit businesses, and those are the ones that I think you hear a lot of the bad stories about, and really are just about making money and not about educating kids.
Aren't businesses in Arizona putting pressure on the governor's legislatures to improve education? Aren't businesses in Arizona putting pressure?
You would think they would be. I think if you talk to some individual business owners, particularly small business owners, the mom and pop type businesses, we heard this during the Prop 208 campaign. Even though they tried to make it sound like small business owners were against Prop 208, we consistently heard over and over again from small business owners around Arizona how they very much supported more investments and raising taxes to support more investments for public education. You even hear that from larger business owners. The problem in Arizona is, I think, my opinion, some of the large organizations that purport to represent businesses in Arizona, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, for example, they are consistently fighting they're the ones who are behind all these tax cuts. They're the ones who are often supporting these tax cuts, and it's head scratching to me, because when you hear other businesses, they'll tell you the reason they're not moving to Arizona is because of our poor education system. And so I don't understand. I think there's a disconnect between the big organizations that have the voice of business at the state capitol versus some of the actual individual business owners or business leaders, because you talk to some of them, they support more funding for education, but the organizations that speak for them, for whatever reason, often are the ones that are fighting the investments. Our biggest opponent in Prop 208 was the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. So they spent over $20 million against us to try and defeat Prop 208. And so that's what we're up against sometimes.
I'm having a little trouble reading this, so I'm going to do the best I can here. But my writing was bad. Sorry. I apologize. Whoever wrote HR 20, can you speak to HR 2808 regarding takeover and closure of low-income that Ducey approves? Low-income, and I can't read that.
Low-income schools, probably? Yeah, I can explain the bill. Yeah. House Bill 2808, it's a bill that's running through the legislature this year. It's passed out of committee, and I think it's waiting a vote before the full House of Representatives. A really, in my opinion, bad piece of legislation that says that if you are, I'm kind of paraphrasing because I'm not intimately familiar with this legislation, but I know it well enough. If you're a failing school, so we have the Arizona Merit Test scores I showed you, and so every year the Department of Education gives schools letter grades that are largely based on those test scores of how their students are doing. So you can be an A, B, C, D, or F school. And so this bill, House Bill 2808, my understanding is if you are a D or F school, you get that grade from the Department of Education, and you don't turn it around, I think in a couple of years, the state can essentially come in and allow a charter school to take over that school, that failing school, and basically allow charter schools to run it, and then they get funding to be able to do whatever they supposedly can do to turn around the school. That is not the way, and actually this kind of gives me an entry into what we should be doing in Arizona to address inequities, and that is oftentimes these schools that get D and F, they're often large populations of students of color, low-income students, the students who have not had some of the same opportunities in life, who maybe didn't have access to early childhood education, maybe didn't have access to full-day kindergarten. And those schools often don't have access to tutors like you have in wealthier districts. There's a lot of reasons why school districts that serve those populations do not get the same results. As I said before, when they have the resources, oftentimes those schools can get the results, but that's not what this bill wants to do. This bill is saying, well, instead of giving you more resources, we're going to let a charter school come in and we're going to give them the resources because they know better. And so that's one example. Another one that we're seeing at the legislature is an expansion of private school vouchers. That if you're a parent at a D or F school, you can get a voucher, state funding, to take your child to a private school. Well, what we're seeing is low-income students of color often are not wanting to go to private schools. One, because they don't have the same types of federal protections. So private schools can actually discriminate more so than you don't have as many protections in private schools. So if you're being discriminated based on your race or with disabilities, you don't have those opportunities. Plus, oftentimes private schools often are not located in low-income areas of town, and they are not required to provide transportation. So it's not a solution for low income. So that's House Bill 2808 is trying to basically allow charters to step in But so the solution that for a lot of this is, and I actually have hope that if we can get some changes at the legislature, if we can stop some of these tax cuts from going into effect and we can get these investments for education, one of the answers is we need to have what we call is an opportunity weight for low-income schools, or some will refer to it as a poverty weight. And so what that means is the way we fund schools in Arizona is we fund each student, and every school gets so many dollars based per student. And the idea is if you're a student, a low-income student, the school will get more funding for those students when they have, a higher population of low-income students, because what the research shows is that if schools have more resources, then they can hire more tutors, have more programs to be able to close the gap. And so that's the answer, not 2808. We need to have a poverty weight or an opportunity weight so that school districts that serve primarily low-income populations are getting more resources to be able to educate those students.
How do we respond to legislators who oppose a Sophie's Choice of Education funding where they say it's either higher education or K through 12 or early childhood funding?
You can say that you don't have to have the Sophie's Choice. With a $2 billion revenue surplus last year, we could have fully funded Prop 208 at it's about $800 million a year. You could completely fund everything that you would fund there. I'll give you a few other examples. So you could do that. You could put money into the Housing Trust Fund, which has been zeroed out for the last decade. It used to be funded before the Great Recession at $40 million. That would make a huge difference in giving people more money, more resources to deal with housing, affordable housing. That's $840 million there. Arizona has the second highest rate of uninsured children, health insurance, low-income children that don't have access to health insurance. For just $12 million, we could provide 100,000 more children with access to health care in Arizona, because that would draw down federal money. That's just 862 million right there you would still have over $1.1 billion left over there. The universities, to fund universities, I think to get back to where they were before the Great Recession, might be to 100 million, maybe 200 at the most. Childcare, we have zeroed out state funding for childcare. That's, I think, 80 million is what we were funding before the recession. So if you add all those things up, I don't even know if I've gotten to $1 billion yet, and you still have $1 billion left. That's how significant these tax cuts that they passed last year were. That's how such a missed opportunity that we had last year, and why it is frustrating to a lot of us that, after we went out, after voters, many of you went out in the hot summer, last summer, collected petitions to say, don't let these tax cuts go into effect. This week, the legislature is going to basically try and run around that effort, and so that they can give these tax cuts that, again, are primarily going to the wealthy. So that's, so we've got the opportunity. We have the opportunity if we can just, get that revenue and be able to invest it, so we don't have to have those Sophie's choices.
And final question, Arizona, where does all of this animosity come from towards public schools? Why, history, and what is so different here?
I don't know if it's just here this year. I think we're seeing this in a lot of states. A lot of it is just, it's ideological. You hear from the legislature, some of the majority often will say, well, we spend 52% of our state budget on public education. And that's absolutely true. We spend 52% of our state budget on public education. But I often say, well, if I make, $30,000 a year and I spend 50% of my budget on paying rent, that doesn't mean I live in a mansion. It just means I'm not making a lot of revenue. And that's the case in Arizona. We're just not taking in a lot of revenue. But in most states, they spend more than half of their budget on public education. And that's where the animosity, in my opinion, comes in, because if you're somebody who is a low tax person who doesn't like taxes, well, in most states, most state taxes, the majority of it goes to education, public education. That's the biggest expense that many states have. And so that's where I think the animosity comes in, is if you don't like taxes, you don't like state taxes, well, you got to go after the one that's really using most of those tax dollars, and in many cases it's public education.
Final question, what is the bottom line here? What can we do?
I feel like I'm always getting bad news when I come to these things, but I really want to leave you with hope, because we can do this. We have the opportunity to make changes, and it starts with this referendum that they're going to consider this week. Let's start by trying to focus and see if we can't stop legislators from doing this end around, doing this repeal and replace, because if we can stop that and it gets on the ballot in November, voters, I think, are going to reject these tax cuts for the rich. And then it's also about elections. It's about who we elect. We're going to have a new governor, a new legislator. Wouldn't it be great if they could come into office next January and they've got $2 billion at hand to be able to invest? But if that doesn't, it's about continuing to work towards the Arizona we want. And I think sometimes people see these policies and think, well, we're alone. We do a lot of polling in our organization, and consistently, 70% or more of Arizona voters are in agreement, I think, with what I'm showing you here today, that they want to see more money for education. They want to see candidates who are supporting public education. Prop 208, they supported raising taxes on the wealthy to fund education. They support these things. They support doing away with the spending limit. So the majority of Arizonans agree. We just got to figure out how to get people elected who are going to do those things. And so there is hope. And so that's what I would leave you with. So thank you very much.
I'm going to take some liberties here. First of all, I want to remind you that we are in the school that black children attended in Tucson from 1912 to 1951. Do look at these historical exhibits. Barbara Lewis gives tours, and I want to encourage you, if you're interested in getting in touch with Barbara. The other thing, Mary, you were right. It was Proposition 208. I kept saying 206. But we manipulated you this morning, let's face it. We brought these cute kids in so you could see how these passionate teachers are leading them, and didn't they enjoy learning? And we want them to continue. But unfortunately, David has pointed out the number of financial stumbling blocks that could hinder this from continuing to occur in our schools. And so, as individuals, and David pointed this out to us too, we need to find out who's running for our legislature, and we need to find out what their commitment is to funding for education. That's as individuals. This is something that we all need to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think the league already has a position on being advocates for education. And we've got to be watchdogs. And you're already doing that with the legislature, but we're going to have to continue, folks. This isn't going to end overnight. So we're going to have to be working with other organizations. We're dependent on the legislature to override that. And so you saw that happen this year. David is pointing out that that's going to happen from now on. And because of the steep cuts and so on that have occurred, and we just can't let this happen. So we've got to coalesce with other groups and decide how we're going to tackle this issue. And the league does great work on learning about issues and understanding them, and the public trusts us on doing this. And I think this even has to be a Speakers Bureau edition, because You walk down the street out here and you ask 10 people if they know about the funding cap in education, and they're going to tell you they don't know a thing about it. And this is extremely important. This is our future, folks, and we have to do something about it. So each of us needs to work together to figure this out on how we can ensure that our kids are the sound future of our society tomorrow. And thank you so much for coming this morning.
For people that don't know me, I'm Susan Black. I've been in the league for a number of years, and I have now directed my energy to working with Literacy Connects. And Literacy Connects, if you don't know about it, is a fabulous organization that reaches out into every element of the community in southern Arizona to advance literacy. For the gaps that we have in education, there is nothing that can be immediately done except pursue, as David has asked us to do. But I'm also reminding you to investigate, doing work with Literacy Connects, and for the work that they do to advance literacy for adults and children and build up their confidence so they can apply for the jobs that they need. All these things come together. It's a challenging commitment, but on the other hand, it's very important for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all so much for spending your morning, Saturday morning, with us here. This was very, very interesting and certainly very educational. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great day.